the emerging role of the private sector in this field, and how has been the experience so far, and what are those challenges that you have faced?
Well, thank you, Chairman and co-panelists, and for Bharat Prabha to give this opportunity. First of all, I come from a very, I take this in the drift of the conversation since morning and at the moment. The PPP has come to mature in India as far as the port sector is concerned, and JNPT, which you are leading so wonderfully, is a very good example of how the landlord model has evolved. But I will take a slight deviation to say that while the PPP has matured and the need of the country is certainly about it, two things that disturb my mind. One is India's capability, desire to come into the world stage, recreate the sense of economic importance that we once had, and that cannot happen, I repeat, cannot happen, that merely having manufacturing industrialization, but also becoming an integral part of the world trade. This is to say that world trade is now, there's a sense of borderlessness in the world today, and that emerges from the fact that more than the events of globalization, and now with the digitalization having superseded, and you mentioned about the consolidation of shipping lines, and the fact that you sit in Amsterdam or you sit in Timbuktu, and you can deliver goods anywhere across the world through one bill of lading, the world has dramatically changed. Now, what disturbs me is that in this scope, India's share in the world trade, it's improving certainly, but it's a meager less than 2%. And the fact that the balance of trade is more heavily towards import, and of course that explains as to why we have an energy requirement, and that gives a tremendous opportunity for an energy transition that I am personally witnessing, and I'm very happy to see that. The second is the LPI index, which has somehow has been kind of an elephant in the room, which Government of India speaks of very largely, is that where does India stand on the logistics performance index? We stand a mere, very poor 44th, and two important reasons that have been identified for that. One, the absence of appropriate infrastructure to handle, and I get back to what Mr. Girish mentioned about the point. And the second is about procedural reforms. I'll take one at a time. Absence of infrastructure, and that, Sanjay ji, to just tell you what has been my journey. Personally, a journey of, I'm a believer that the distinction between the government and the private sector is a very artificial distinction. If anything, it is a lag factor in the government. There's nothing, I mean, you are the best example of how the thrift of the private sector, the efficiency of the private sector, under regulatory umbrella of a very benign government structure can lead to sense, very proudly we saying that today, between JNPT and between Mundra, and between some of the terminals in Chennai, and of course the terminal that Mr. Girish runs, we have some of the best ports in the world. Our GCRs, our crane rates, our productivity, not to mention the world's largest vessels. I don't know why we are so fascinated about size. It's about efficiency. Incidentally, Raffles, which visited Mundra at 400 LOA and 24,000 capability, it's not about that. It is improving the index and making India relevant. In that context, has the PPP underscored the point? It has. Does it need to travel further? It needs to. What does it need to do? To foster an investment cycle into the entire sector, we must come out of a 30-year concession period. I'm happy to and delighted to note that the latest MCA guidelines talk about a right of first refusal after 30 years. But please understand that for a terminal which is intensive in capital, you need a certain amount of equity as well as a certain amount of loan structure to build a capital, infuse capital to build a modern terminal. It doesn't come easy. And you have to compete, our capability of building best cranes in the world is still limited. When you do that, look for larger concession periods. And to that extent, I'm very glad to mention that a little bit of policy advocacy with some of the state governments, such as West Bengal, where we have won a tender to build a port at Tajpur, is on a 99-year concession period. I think that is path-breaking to see that a long concession period gives a gestation for a larger capital cycle, which then fosters larger economic development. How has been the journey between the private and the government? The private and the government need to merge, and therefore, the procedural reform that I'm talking about, and there it has been identified about large-scale reforms in the customs and in the way we digitalize and conduct our cargo movements. I, for one, have been at the receiving end of seeing that whether a container carries a certain amount of goods or not. And we've all been, at the receiving end to say that, contraband goods, etc., come to a port willingly. There cannot be something more farther from truth about it. So therefore, we have a voter to say, today, technology enables you to have 100% scanning at all our ports. Now, technology, I repeat, is not a lag on the efficiency. If today, if you look at a simple equation between RTG and an RMG means, and if you're automating an RMG, and Mr. Girish, you will bear me out, it will not lead to a lag. It hasn't led to a lag in the best terminals in Port Klang, in Singapore, in Jebel Ali. It will not lead to a lag in India as well. And that's where we are transiting. If you want to be competent, if you want to compete, and if you want to be relevant, we have to have the best in the world. So I come back to the concession period. And also a fostering climate to give a certain amount of private investment into that. We well recognize that private investment is a very important part of development. And I myself leading some of these initiatives, very happy to do that. We need a performance index which is reasonable, which is kind of accommodates as to what can be a force majeure, genuine force majeure. What would you tell if COVID happens and the world comes to a stop? Will you hold it against an operator that you have not performed? So you need a more reasonable and a more understanding climate for business. So if there is an ease of doing business, the twin pillars on which I would stand, good infrastructure, an enabling environment through a regulatory framework, and an understanding, capable administration which is aware of the difficulties and comes to that. My last point, which is very important and I feel, is that all the ports and the necessity for India to recreate its manufacturing regions along with the ports. For long, we have been taking manufacturing regions well into the hinterland. While there can be economic debate on how a balanced development does occur, you must be aware that much of our lands near the seas are somewhat which needs a little bit of reclamation, which can be rehabilitated. If you wish to seek for examples, you don't have to go far. The entire Singapore, which stands at the crossroads of East and West trade, is entirely from reclaimed land. You come to the Middle East today, Jebel Ali terminals. If you go to see the palm resorts in Dubai, all of them are reclaimed lands. So when the pressure of land is there, if you reclaim and create coastal economic zones, and you have a more kind of an accommodative CRZ rules in this country, then you create a coastal economic zone, and ports need to mature, not merely as ports anymore. Incidentally, we don't look ourselves as a port operator anymore. We look ourselves as cargo aggregators or as a transport utility service. So I keep saying in a very Socratean kind of thing, the whole is different from the sum of its parts, which means we are a port operator and beyond it. We are a train operator and beyond it. We are a terminal operator and beyond it. We are an ICD operator and beyond it. It is the ability to integrate and therefore have a composite value for the customer, delivering at first and last mile services. These are some of the important things that immediately come to my mind. Fair enough, when we go ahead, we can do a little bit of more discussion. The last point on RE that I want to tell you, renewable energy has to be embraced as digitalization has too. When I talked about the integration cannot happen without a platform of digitalization. So today, the Amazons of the world, whether we want them or not, all of us have a certain kind of, if you wish to buy something today, your first reaction would, can Amazon deliver to me? Can Swiggy deliver to me? What has it done basically? It has aggregated a huge mass of unaggregators and brought a service to your table. That's what the transport sector needs to evolve into. And how does sustainability and RE come into that? I'm very delighted, Chairman Sir, to apprise you that we have in the APSEZ taken a mission that by 2025, we would become carbon neutral, and by 2030, net zero. And this is in part of the larger aspirations that we have given. And you'll be aware that we are rated not just by Indian agencies, but by the best agencies in the world, because we have to draw capital from around the world. So you cannot but not pass the test. So while we do so, a very small thing that I wish to update, we very recently have placed an order for transforming each of our ITVs from a diesel energy mode into electric ITVs. And as I speak to you, by the end of calendar year 23, maybe in 3 months from now, we would have transited in every port of ours to go in the container transportation, horizontal transportation into entire electric ITVs. What does it give to, and what does the opportunity for the energy transition bring in? It also brings in something that India is standing on. From a net importer of fossil fuels, We are in an exciting phase to see that if you can have a hydrogen economy, a green hydrogen at that, ammonia economy, and incidentally, the largest users of this, madam, it will be very happy for you to note, is the shipping sector. It is the ships of the world which are the guzzlers of bad fuel. So all the dirty fuel can be replaced, and when it happens, Indian coastal economic zones, right along 7,517 kilometers. I always grew up as a child reading the beautiful book of Niraj Chaudhary, A Million Mutinies. I think today, 1.4 billion dreams are waiting to encapture themselves in this kind of thing.
The future of ports, and we discussed on the kind of infrastructure, the smart port bit, the sustainable port, but then we also were now talking about this topic where Bharat Prabha essentially means how people can come in more, how this sector can be in the psyche of the people. There are two things there. One is, at one level, we are saying that there'll be more automation, more digitization. So in that sense, the direct port employment is going to be lesser, right? So what are those other areas where you think it can come in?
Thank you so much. First of all, greetings and regards to Secretary Shipping, sir. Chairman, sir, I was referring to, you have already given a cue as to how ports are evolving, let's say at JNPT, into a industrial zone. Let me tell you that at each of the ports, and especially cite the example of a very virtuous economic cycle that plays out at Mundra. So Mundra is 40 kilometers of waterfront. At any best imagination, it can be a complex of 3 large complexes. Today we are developing a container complex with about 6 container terminals having a capacity of more than about close to 25 million TEUs in times to come. So I think we will play a part in being the mega ports that you are looking at. But more importantly, the industrial aspiration of India and the way it can sit with the coastal community. So here we have a port and the world's largest coal import terminal, leading to 2 ultra mega power plants on behalf of Tata Power, CGPL, and the Adani Power. And of late, when you talk about a lack of employment and people migrating into new jobs, see, we have to welcome change into migrating into new jobs, and these jobs have to come through a power of digitalization. Somehow, I am extremely optimistic about the digital journey that India will do, because I'm aware of the aspiration of a normal Indian. He may or may not get to go to a school. Give him a smartphone, he can do a text. Today the largest users of the smartphone and digitalization post-COVID is not us who sit in very cool or warm rooms, as the case may be with the weather, but it is those unseen, unknown, unheard workers who have been touched by the direct cash transfer and who have the ability to convert a small ride, a small Uber, a small total, including the person comes to your house. This is the power of digitalization. When these workers digitally empower themselves, they will get to the new jobs. And what are they? The transition of energy that is happening in India, India's relevance, solar. You'll be proud to know that the solar panel manufacturing and the other accessories related to that, if you want to see state of the art, you just have to visit Mundra, which incidentally I've requested you always. And if you come and see, you'll feel proud. The other day, we had some guests from a first world country, I'll not name them, very large investors of a size who can compete with the Canadian pension funds, etc. And they said, look, for a moment we thought we weren't in India. And we clarified to them, look, this is the new India. You better get accustomed to what new India is looking and will look in the future. And all the people that you see here, they come from the adjoining villages through CSR initiatives and through the outreach programs. So that is the digital transformation and the transformation of the economic employment that will happen. I'm, for one, not at all worried that RTGs will give way to remote RMGs, because these are the people who will then come to these new jobs. And all the RE transition, the renewable power transmission that is happening, and I'm not even talking about the hydrogen economy. Today, some of the best promoters, largest capital gainers in the country today, I don't name them, are putting their money and their word into seeing that India will be at the forefront of this energy transition. When it happens, I am only hoping, I'm sure, my lifetime is around to see that we will be having hydrogen-powered vessels sailing out from India, and that will be the transition that we're looking at.